Durzo Blint from the Night Angel Trilogy versus Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. An interesting comparison because of how different these two really are in morality, development, just pretty much every aspect of their character as a whole. But we're going to do this comparison like we did the one earlier today and go ahead and jump into round 1, fight 4 of the
character tournament.
Jon Snow versus Durzo Blint. Let's go. We're going to compare them through 7 categories. Let's go over them now. Origin, development, role, interest, relationships, who would win in a fight, and the tiebreaker that's now always done no matter what because it's fun. This video will contain spoilers for both characters, so if you have not read the series, go ahead and click off the video.
Just do it!
Durzo Blint from the Night Angel Trilogy's origin is fairly straightforward. He is a wet boy or an assassin in the Night Angel Trilogy, pretty much the best at what he does by a lot, and a pretty dark guy who seems to have forsaken most emotion or love or affection. Of course, that turns out not to be true. Much longer, more intimate history of being hundreds or well over 1,000 years old is delivered in a exposition dump that I was not a huge fan of, but overall, it's still really neat for the character that is presented to us. Jon Snow's origin, though, we really walk with him more. Durzo Blint is established as a finished pinnacle character, while Jon Snow is kind of the young bastard who grows into the Jon Snow of the Wall, leader of men, and so much more throughout the series. And that development and origin, really, we grow with him. And because of that, pretty much by default, I'm going to give this to Jon Snow just because I really like actually being able to walk with a character through their origin. And I get for the character that Durzo Blint is, we couldn't really do that. He needs to be established. But with what his origin is, kind of just being ham-fisted to us, I just was not a huge fan. So I'm going to go ahead and give this point to Jon Snow. Now it comes to development. Once again, pretty one-sided here because Game of Thrones' amazing development with their characters. Durzo Blint develops quite a bit throughout the book that he really stars in and after his resurrection a little bit, but most of all, he just kind of is the man we establish him as, and he's broken down a bit, but I wouldn't say there's any monstrous development. There's so many hints and cracks in the facade that he gives of this emotionless assassin that we know who he really is and how he really acts, so there's not a whole lot there in terms of development that I consider surprising or revolutionary. Jon Snow, on the other hand, is a technical achievement of character development that, especially in the books, not quite so much in the TV show because the delivery of the actor is a little flat in my opinion, but in the books develops in amazing ways. George R.R. Martin is a master of development that I think the only author who can really top him is Robert Jordan. He develops from the insecure bastard kid to someone who holds up the family name and is really one of the powerhouses within Game of Thrones, not in a unrealistic fast development, but through a series of events that really helps shape a man that we as the readers really come to admire and helps lead so many to the right path, or the only path you can really get behind, following Daenerys at the current point of the Game of Thrones story. So for that, I'm giving Jon Snow development. When it comes to the role these two play in the world, there's one aspect to Jon Snow that for me elevates him to a level above Durzo Blint, but let's go ahead and jump into Durzo real quick. His role is interesting because he has shifted this world a whole lot before the story begins. He manages to shape historical events in all kinds of monstrous ways, but those historical events never really have a direct impact on the story we're reading. I mean, they have indirect ones with leadership changes and things like that, but it never seems vital to what's happening. But the other important thing he's doing is creating Kylar. Monstrously important to the story, and it's executed fairly well. It's not enough to make up for the fact that Jon Snow is acting as the harbinger, warning of the threat coming from the north, something that is vitally important to the series and shapes the entire conflict for the end of the Game of Thrones. This is without a doubt the most important role someone in Game of Thrones could have, and later on in the series, when he's trying to convince everyone of this problem, it becomes the real central conflict, the real thing everything hinges on. The excellence of the execution of this role from George R.R. Martin really is what's going to give Jon Snow the leg up here, in my opinion. I found it to be one of the best executions of this kind of role of all time. It's really hard to get your readers to believe that this person could fail at warning, but with George R.R. Martin's writing and Game of Thrones higher stakes, I really began to think, oh my god, could Jon Snow fail here? And that's hard to do. So for that reason, I'm giving role to Jon Snow. And now we have interest for the reader. How interesting are these characters? Pretty clear winner for me, but I'm going to go through this really carefully and kind of maybe make sure I'm on the right track so you can understand where I'm coming from. Durzo Blint's very interesting, but it's a little more of a young fantasy series, and coming in as a more mature reader and rereading the Night Angel Trilogy, it's going to show you that a lot of the interest here is just kind of based off the whole assassins aspect, and Durzo Blint is the heart and soul of that interest. He is just the, here's the assassin world, look how interesting it is. And as a character, having him be this emotionless, trying to be emotionless guy, and you know he's going to go down this road, is not super interesting. And what absolutely kills it for me is resurrection. Anytime a character is resurrected, I am not a fan. It ruins them for me. That being said, Jon Snow, exact same problem. In the TV show, we see it happen. He gets resurrected, and it is so annoying. I hate this. If your character dies, keep them dead. Yes, it is a trope we have to deal with on both accounts here. That being said, Jon Snow's interest is leagues above Durzo's in my opinion. He is the lens we get to see beyond the wall with. He helps the reader explore the most dangerous part of this world and really put the threat that is coming into context. Aside from Daenerys and maybe Tyrion, Jon Snow is absolutely one of the most unique lenses for the Game of Thrones series, and I'm a big fan of following his footsteps. Game of Thrones interest levels are just higher than that of the Night Angel Trilogy overall for me, so I'm going to give this point as well to Jon Snow. Now we have relationships. This is actually, in my opinion, where Jon Snow suffers a little bit. He bounces around too much to really get interested in any of his relationships. He has some good friends, his dynamic with his father is good, and his love interests are George R. R. Martin love interests. Durzo Blint, on the other hand, I like his relationship aspects a lot more. The relationship he has with Kylar Azoth is fascinating, and I like the way their mentorship really develops. Durzo's relationship with the people he's trying to spurn and the lover who loves him but he doesn't know it and she doesn't know it, back and forth, is also something definitely worth paying attention to. And overall, I just think Durzo's relationships are better fleshed out than Jon Snow's. That's one of the problems with Game of Thrones, with so many relationships to flesh out. Sometimes the more minor one suffers, and I find Jon Snow's quite a bit, especially in the books, to suffer to me. Everyone when reading interprets relationships differently, but for me, Jon Snow, especially because he's such a brooding character, has never reached that level in terms of relationships for me. This point goes to Durzo Blint. And now we have who would win in a fight. How are these fights happening is something that's been a problem for when I did the Perrin Vin one as well. So for me, it's just one-on-one facing each other in a field, who would win. It's pretty clear here that Durzo Blint would kill Jon Snow. He's just a next level physically enhanced assassin. Some of his feats are on the same level as like movie Captain America in terms of what he's able to do with speed, and his abilities and special abilities really elevate him. So for that reason, I'm giving this point to Durzo Blint. So now we have who would do better in the other's world. Jon Snow is an incredible leader, and I think that's a very vital part of his character. He's someone who is logical, level-headed, a very good fighter, but he's pretty bad at keeping his head down. He kind of is just this presence that always stands out. It's seen when he goes to the wall, and it's seen again and again throughout the series. I actually think Durzo Blint is at quite a disadvantage as well if he goes into the Game of Thrones world. A lot of his tools are from the information and networks and knowledge of the city. If you take all that away from him, he's pretty stripped down. I think both of these characters are pretty equally out of their element. Yes, you could say that Durzo Blint could kill more people, but is that really his objective? What would be going on here? This is just an odd comparison. I think Durzo Blint could avoid death, but I don't really think he could elevate to a higher level, because Game of Thrones is about power seizing, and I don't think Durzo Blint ever really cares about that. Jon Snow, though, on the other hand, is a really good survivor. I think he would do a decent job of surviving in the Night Angel Trilogy world. He would never elevate to a higher status because he has no connections to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and call the tiebreaker a wash. I like this matchup from the beginning, and it's just because you're comparing two very different moral people here. One at their core is gray all the way through, and the other is one of the few beacons of good personhood for Game of Thrones. I hope you guys liked the video. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I'm doing here and see the channel to continue and improve. I hope you're having a great start to your week. Peace.